please give a big warm welcome for Gary King.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Andy. I'd like to thank Andy and Sheila and Jason and Di as well for the years that they've been putting on this event. Such an honour to be speaking here, really. Glastonbury. Whenever I come here, I think this is the town that's anything is possible. We can talk about things that you can't normally talk about in other places. I was thinking about a woman I once met when I came over who found a cockroach that wasn't very well. And she put it in a matchbox and gave it some rescue remedy. Sadly, the cockroach never made it, but bless her. Okay, let's get down to business. My talk today is called Those Left Behind. Andy, as mentioned, I'm predominantly a crop circle researcher. I've been involved now for this is my 21st year. And during that time, I've become very good friends with people like Jaime Maussan and Ajay Javara and Peter Robbins and a bunch of UFO researchers that I consider to be credible. And you share stories and you find out stuff. And so a couple of cases have come up, which I found particularly interesting because most people think that crop circle research or UFO research, paranormal research, is about proving to the non-believers that our mission in life is to go out and show, look, there's the evidence. But that's not always what we do. There are other reasons that we conduct our research. And with regards to UFOs, crop circles, and so on, there's phenomena A and phenomena B. There's the lights in the sky, and then there's our response to it. How we respond to witnesses and contactees, how we respond to anybody that comes forward and says something about having had some form of paranormal experience. And I think that in phenomena B, there is a richness of data, sociologically, psychologically, culturally, that's relevant for our research and our inquiries to find out what this phenomena might be about or what a collection of phenomena might be about. So I've called it Those Left Behind because I specifically want to talk about the people who get left behind after they have these contactee experiences. There's just one quote I want to go back to, just a moment. John Keel, in his pioneering book in 1970, Trojan Horse, Operation Trojan Horse, encouraged us almost half a century ago to stop focusing on the lights in the sky and start looking closely at the effects these phenomena have on people, witnesses and contactees. He said the real meaning and purpose behind the UFO phenomena is not some machine in the sky, but with those that are transformed by them. The secret of contact lies with the contactees. Academics call the subject of the paranormal a Waterbasket problem. The term paranormal was devised by academics in the 1880s to predominantly investigate poltergeist phenomenon. But pretty quick, within 100 years, it became this kind of umbrella term for anything that's paranormal, healing, crop circles, UFOs. It all gets lumped in. And pretty much these days, if you say that you're investigating or attending a conference even on the paranormal, it kind of means to other people, not normal. I don't think that's what it was originally intended to be, you know. Under this broad umbrella, however, we find that there's millennia-old stories of folklore. We go back in history, you know, no religion ever started without some guy having a paranormal experience. The question comes with whether or not you convince other people that it actually happened. I mean, Moses did a pretty good job. He came down and told people he had a conversation with a bush on fire, and still people believe him. So some get some different degrees of success, it seems, with relaying their stories, and others don't. Often these experiences contain, Jacques Vallée called it the supernatural assault, when somebody has a supernatural or paranormal experience, because it's quite shaking. And the actual definition that was coined by these French academics of a paranormal experience was something which is both subjective and objective at the same time. You see something, but also something takes place inside. It might be a series of fantastic coincidences that led you to that event. It might be that you get some telepathic message that the earth is burning up and we need to do something about it. Something else happens to the individual simultaneously with the paranormal experience, and that seems to be a good definition of something paranormal, when it affects inside and outside of us. And so I've been very interested in the research of a man called Jeffrey Kripal. He's a professor of comparative literature, mystical literature, and he talks about the cultural filter that we have. And so you look at experiences, people who have experiences through the ages, and you know, when fairies were in, you know, it was fairies down the garden. If you go to Mexico, it's Chupacabra that's kidnapping the kids until aliens come along, and then it's UFOs. And we kind of frame things up through our cultural filter without really looking at it. But when you look at the data, the same patterns of what happens to people, the transformations that they go through, is consistent. And so, you know, you can come up with theories about, you know, is our mind culturally filtering these experiences, or is the, whatever it is, the other intelligence presenting itself to us in a way that would be the most acceptable way to us? Either way, it's the parallels between an experience that might not be a UFO, that might be a kind of, you know, a transformationary healing experience, and the patterns that emerge from that in the person at the time and subsequently. And also, when you look at compare that to people who have UFO or other experiences, you see the same patterns. And that's really what I want to get to. So pretty much my presentation today is going to focus on those left behind. And I'm going to talk about Westall in 1966, first of all. This is a fascinating story. The incident occurred on the 6th of April, 1966. Two schools were involved, a secondary school called Westall High School and a primary school called Westall State School. At break time, when the children were playing in the yard, one child saw a UFO in the sky and alerted everyone else around her. She ran into the school and told the science teacher, Mr. Greenwood, what was going on. Now, I've pulled out a lot of YouTube clips with interviews with the witnesses for this presentation, because I think that nobody speaks better than the person themselves. So here's the first clip.
This boy come running in and say, Mr. Greenwood, there's these things in the sky, these things in the sky.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off.
It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a balloon, it was nothing like that.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go.
All the students were just running all over the place, hysterical.
Westall High School as a teaching situation ceased.
My girlfriend and I sat on the fence, climbed the fence, the school boundary, and we were crying, thinking it was the end of the world.
50 years later, these witnesses, some witnesses, a number of them have come forward. We sat on the fence and cried because we thought it was the end of the world. These were children that were about 12 and a half years of age. There were 585 students in total in the schools. About 300 to 400 of them witnessed the event, plus 3 teachers. My first question with someone who, as a young girl, has to sit on the fence with her friend thinking the world's going to end is that after an event like that, how do you not get PTSD or something? You surely need a lot of love and compassion and understanding from grown-ups, even if you don't believe them, right? So, did they get love and compassion? Not really. Let's have a look.
This is a mystery story that has, as its setting, a school. And most of the players were school children. They had this extraordinary experience, which they then tried to share with adults. And a lot of them had a lot of trouble doing that. They were disbelieved, almost stigmatized.
I think, like a lot of other people, I just shut up about it because of the ridicule. And it was everybody. You know, you were a kid, you were making it up. So you just be quiet, and in your mind, you just think, I know what I saw, and no one's ever going to shake me from that. I know what I saw.
I really felt for them as people who had this incredible experience, and yet they haven't been able to make sense of it.
Ridicule and condemnation, no love and compassion. This is typical, isn't it? Everybody knows that this is how people get treated when they come forward with a paranormal experience. But this case is particularly interesting because it's 1960s. The response on behalf of the government and the authorities is quite different to what we see often today. My own experience, I was a lawyer in 1996, 3 kids, family, you know, going out there trying to make your way in the world. And when something powerful happens to you, you get faced with this choice. You know, you go, all right, I'll go and tell my friends. My friends will say, okay, fair enough, you know, what drugs were you on? But then does it grab you enough to change your life? Does it grab you enough to say, well, look, I think there's something very serious in this that's life-changing and transforming, and I'm going to follow it. I'm going to give up my regular life. And that's what I did. And so I've personally got the experiences of how people responded to me and how they do today. Even this week, I discovered a crop circle last week while I was out with a couple of people on a tour. We just drove along the road, and there was one that hadn't been reported. We stopped, flew the drone, I took a photograph, posted it online. And now I've been receiving lots of questions this week that I orchestrated a bunch of guys to go and make it so that I could sell the tour to the people. You know, you get all this crap, right? But it still goes on, and this is what we do to each other. This is the real issue of what happens to those left behind. Some of the children were affected quite badly by this experience at Westall.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles. I went where the herd went. Was the chemistry teacher at the time. And she just grabbed a camera and started clicking.
Several students fainted or reacted very badly to the incident. One girl called Tanya was taken away in an ambulance, and her friends said that they never ever saw her again. I'll come back to that in a little while. There's an update on that story. Shane Ryan, the main investigator who produced this documentary, carried out extensive research and actually tracked her down. She said that she didn't want to speak about it, particularly not on record, but she said that she was given ECT therapy after the incident and has no memory of the incident ever happening, or any memories of anything before that age. So it's mass hysteria. Kids are thinking it's the end of the world. Others are being taken away in ambulances. What happens next?
That afternoon, our principal called a special assembly and told us all not to talk about it.
All I know is the whole school was told off. The headmaster says, all you kids are nuts. It's a weather balloon. Don't talk about it.
I was prepped to tell the students that what they'd seen didn't exist. We weren't allowed to leave the school, at least I wasn't. My job was to walk up and down the corridors and make sure that all students were in their rooms. I was walking back from the West End. There was a confrontation between Mr. Sambleby, Barbara Robbins, and a man I'd never seen before. I thought it was a police uniform, but it was just dark blue. It was demanded that she hand over, not the film, but the entire camera.
I was near the gate and the police had arrived.
There were journalists outside. The police are being called in to keep the journalists away.
We were told that we weren't allowed to speak to the media in school grounds. After school finished, there was a TV crew outside the school grounds, so we undertook an interview with them.
Everyone took off onto the oval.
Now, I can't remember whether it was a principal or a school representative that came out and ordered us to go home and the film crew to leave.
And I'd actually been giving an interview to Channel 9 and the policeman actually walked up to them and said, stop filming and you go back into the school ground. Okay, so that's what I did. I was 12 and a half years old.
Because I was a mischievous sort of person, I was always getting into trouble. I had detention for actually appearing on the show, and then I got detention again at a later date after my picture and story was in the Dan Allen Journal. So it didn't go unpunished, but it was worth it.
If it wasn't for that sort of spirit, huh? God loves a rebel. I know I do. Detention for talking to the media. Told you're all nuts to children. And the teachers knew that they weren't nuts, but they had to do what they were being told by the authorities that turned up. Channel 9 Media, the media outlet that conducted the interview, broadcast parts of it on TV that night, but subsequent search of their archives found empty film canisters. It's all gone. The reporter who conducted the interview gave a statement to Shane Ryan and confirmed that he was there filming the interviews, but has no idea what happened to the footage. A reporter from a local newspaper was interviewed, and he remembers very clearly that the students and teachers were warned not to speak to him. So they're all told to keep quiet, they're all deluded, and whatever else was needed to make the whole thing go away. Is this healthy for a mind of 12 and 13-year-old children? As you'll see, the experience has defined the ensuing lives of some of those children who continue to seek proof for what they saw and somehow prove that they're not crazy.
As far as I know, only the science teacher, Andrew Greenwood, saw the object in the air. Although he's spoken with me privately, he refuses to go on the public record. Several teachers dismissed the whole thing as mass hysteria. The response left students feeling confused and conflicted. Some are still searching for answers.
I want to find some sort of proof that this happened so we don't keep on, you know, getting called silly people. And, you know, no one's ever wanted to know the details before. They just think I'm stupid. They don't want to know the story. They just, I said, I've seen UFOs or flying saucers, and they say, yeah, sure. What drugs were you on that day? And, you know, I was 13 years old. I was at school in the daytime. I wasn't on any drugs.
50 years, huh? Defines that woman's life. Everybody tells her she's mad. Everybody tells her she's crazy. How cruel is this? And it still continues. And yet she knows there's something, and it's defined her life. And you have to extrapolate the issue as well, because if we consider that there is another intelligence, we don't know if it's extraterrestrial, we don't know, but if there is another intelligence that is interacting with us, it knows this is going to be the fallout, because it knows what we're all doing here on Earth. I'm really convinced of that. And so then you ask yourself, well, why would it treat little children so badly? Are they worthy enough to be collateral damage to some kind of campaign? What is the message here? What really strikes me is that we see ourselves more in all of this than we do in any answers from the lights in the sky. It reveals more about us than it does about them. That's what I find really interesting. Mr. Greenwood, who he mentioned there, the teacher who was the witness, was visited by 2 Air Force officers later in the week. He was told that if he spoke again in public, he wouldn't be able to teach again. They threatened to expose him as an alcoholic. Being a new teacher with a career ahead of him, he was compliant. He referred to them as goons. He kept telling him that they kept telling him there was no such thing as UFOs. So he said, well, if that's the case, why are you so bothered by me saying that there is?
We hid behind this tree, but fortunately this tree, the branches came down to the ground. Here we are, crouched down on our knees, and we can only look every so often as this tractor came around. He was on guard duty. This was a farmer who has decided to help out. We observed 2 army trucks, 2 men in camouflage, and 2 men in blue uniforms.
We better cover this area.
And it appeared that a soldier was using a metal mine detector. He's walking around, sweeping back and forth.
Keep down. They'll see
The
us.
next time I see them, they turned and they started kicking violently at the ground. The 2 officers decide then, time to come back. They come back to the truck and they were gone, and then we could enter the paddock.
Les.
We had no idea what we were walking into. We didn't know what those army men were doing, and All I can say, it was just, what is this? To have the army there and all the rest of it, it was something important.
Piqued my interest, crop circle. Who knows? But there were in 2010, when Shane Ryan did this documentary and tried to track down the witnesses, he found 85 witnesses to the UFOs and 147 to the grass circle who all saw it, because the UFOs hovered over the playground and then they flew off to a place called the Grange and came down, and loads of the kids that you saw jumping and running over the fences in those artist impressions were chasing after it to see where it went, and it left that impression in the field. And I recommend you watch this documentary. It's free on YouTube. It's about an hour long, and later on there's witnesses who come back and say that all the circles were burnt out. They set fire to the field in the end to burn them out. One local newspaper ran the story for about a week, but the main news tabloids, come up with the original story that it was a weather balloon. These weather balloons were very common to this area. This should be something that's noted as well, and everyone was used to seeing them. And the most relevant point is that up to that day, no one had ever reported seeing a UFO that they thought they'd mistaken with a weather balloon. If it had been something that was regular, we think we've seen a UFO, and they go, it's a weather balloon. But never, ever until that day. So these kids were used to it. It was 4 kilometers away, the airfield. But what we normally get is people like this next guy brought onto the TV, unchallenged, to give us his version.
What we must do is look at the original reports of the time and see what really happened.
The idea that what those people saw came from outer space is alien to Richard Saunders from Australian Skeptics.
On that very morning, not too far away, about 30 kilometres away, a weather balloon was released. The winds were blowing towards the school. Now, I've seen a weather balloon in the sky near an airport, and stuff me, I didn't know what it was.
Stuff me. Yeah, he wasn't even born in 1966, I'm pretty sure. So we get these regular people that go on the media, we've all seen them, who go unchallenged about any details, like that lady was saying. They don't actually focus on the details. They've just got one narrative, and the best way to win an argument, in their view, is not to listen to the other side. So we're used to seeing these kinds of guys. These people come out and they rubbish the kind of regular witnesses, the general people like yourselves and myself. But what about high-level witnesses? What about people who've got some standing, whether they're high-end academics or in the military or something? What happens to those kinds of people when they come forward? Well, this incident is very revealing about that too.
The government's most vocal critic was the top atmospheric scientist, Professor James MacDonald.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.
And that's the important point, isn't it? No science. No science. We can't investigate it. Anybody that wants to ask questions about it, shut up, you're mad. It shuts it down for serious questions about us, about our world, about reality and the role we're supposed to be playing in it. And there's a debunking campaign. When I first came into the crop circles, the guy who brought me to the crop circles was an eccentric guy from America who I've never met anybody like him, and I'm sure I'll never meet anybody like him for the rest of my life. He was a really unique guy. But he spent the 60s in UCLA, and he'd been involved in the whole Vietnam thing, and he'd been involved in peyote shamanism and Carlos Castaneda and the cult that was set up in his wake and so on. And the man just said CIA every other word. CIA, CIA. And in the end, I had a gullet full of it, because you just end up getting paranoid. You think, well, they're everywhere, right? And then you kind of ground yourself and you say, look, there is obviously some kind of thing where they want to keep the public at bay with this, and they use a variety of methods, from harsh in '66 to bullying children, to perhaps less extreme means these days. But nonetheless, there is a campaign to keep all of this away from us. This man who was outspoken about the Westall incident, this is what happened to him.
The person who had taken all the risks was Professor James MacDonald. His criticism of the government had provoked powerful enemies, but it didn't stop him challenging the establishment with other unorthodox scientific theories. Years ahead of his colleagues, he predicted high-altitude aircraft would destroy the ozone layer and increase the risk of skin cancer. He was invited to address the US Congress, but during his testimony, a congressman made an opportunistic attack. He publicly ridiculed MacDonald by saying he believed in UFOs and little green men. MacDonald's professional reputation was ruined.
Ridiculed and ruined at the expense of a brilliant mind. Think about the major contributions that man could have made. He was already pointing out in '66 that we've got a problem with global warming and that various things could do it. This is issues for all of us. Anyone who doesn't think global warming's happening probably needs to get outside a little more. Something's changing. We don't know what it is, but we needed minds focused on it rather than shut up in that kind of fashion. This has implications for all of us. I mean, look at the parallel to this is the cannabis thing, which I'm pleased to see has been released this week in the media that they're actually going to prescribe it medically now. They've finally, after all these years, accepted the evidence that it helps people. But it's interesting that psychedelics and cannabis and stuff were shut down at the same time in the '60s, and they're both really massive tools for investigating the mind. And they've both been shut down. People who have paranormal experiences, there's a lot of rich data in there that can give us a bigger understanding about who we are. Similarly with cannabis, and both things get shut down. Who's behind it and why? What happens, there's a wonderful book by a woman called Margaret Heffernan called Willful Blindness. It's only released about 5 or 6 years ago. She did some massive research into the fact that how we can all, and we're all guilty of this, right? I mean, the classic example of willful blindness is, have you ever driven with, an apologist to senior citizens, have you ever driven with somebody who perhaps is in the later years of their life, whose driving skills aren't so good anymore? And when you say to them, look, you know, it's a little bit frightening or a little bit scary, you know, you nearly hit that car, or they don't want to accept it. There's a willful blindness to their ability compared to what other people will tell them. They don't want to hear it. That's a minor thing of willful blindness. It gets much more serious than that. There was a doctor in Bristol University who subsequently worked in, had worked in London on children, paediatric surgeon. He moved to Bristol and worked under a very famous kind of elderly doctor who was killing 50% more patients were dying on his operating table than in London. The mortality rate was seriously different. And he noticed that this surgeon was taking twice as long to perform the operations than the one in London. Well, he made the mistake of speaking out against his peers, and we all know what the medical profession's like for not doing that. He was rubbished and ridiculed, and I urge you to read the story of the willful blindness, because even though he finally got it exposed and he finally got the man retired and saved lives, there are nurses and doctors today that still say he shouldn't have said anything. This is a real phenomena that we're all guilty of in so many ways, and I think it's really relevant to the whole issue of reality and what we're doing with it. So let's see. Let's talk to these... I'll finish by saying that. This doctor was a whistleblower, right? He was a whistleblower, and we all know what happens to whistleblowers. Look at Snowden. Well, people who come forward with paranormal experiences are whistleblowers on the reality that we live in. They're saying, look, all that stuff they've told you in school and what they're saying about physics and so on might not be true. And look what happens to people. So there must be something there to get such a response. Because if there was nothing, then why would they bother? So, remember Tanya, the little girl who fainted?
Can I ask what happened to the girl? You took her back to the school, the one that was hysterical. Is it Tanya? And she went into the hospital, and then you went to visit her at her place, and they said she didn't live there.
Yes, I went to her house the following day, and an English-speaking woman opened the door and said there had never been a Tanya living there. Now, the problem with that is that Tanya's parents didn't speak English to start with. I think they were Yugoslavian. So I'd been to this house a lot of times and then was told, no, sorry, you're mistaken.
Oh my God,
So what's happened to her? Do you know if she disappeared? Have you had any contact with her? Do you know where she is and what happened?
I have had no personal contact with her. I know one of the researchers has. She prefers to stay anonymous and not be involved in anything at all. She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened. And then there was a very odd story about her parents putting her in a convent for some reason that was, to me, totally ridiculous. That's it.
So if you're a kid, you can get disappeared. They really took it seriously, didn't they, in 1966? I mean, imagine that if you were 12 years old and you went and knocked on your friend's door and they said, you don't live here, never been, no one's ever lived here, and you slept there and had sleepovers and stuff. Imagine that. It's pretty serious. Okay, I'll just play this.
Shane, you claim you've spoken to more than 100 witnesses. Why do you think there was a cover-up? It seems at very, very high levels.
Well, that's the $94 million question, I guess. We do know that a very high-ranking public servant from the Department of Supply was dispatched to Westall that day. He investigated. And after that wonderful Australian documentary, Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery, was aired on Australian television in 2010, his daughter contacted me and said, thank you for having that documentary made, because my father was there that day. And he suffered for what he saw. And she and her brother, I've spoken to them both, really believe that his untimely death just 4 years later was connected with the stress that was applied to him because he tried to get answers to what happened. Why the cover-up? What could it possibly have been 50 years ago that would now be a threat to national security or anybody's reputation or any alliance with another country? Is that possible after 50 years? I think we need the answers.
It just goes on, doesn't it? The daughter's called up to say, thank you for bringing this truth out. It killed my father. The implications for those left behind after being witnesses or contactees is, as my teacher used to say, not for sissies. It's serious. It really is, because the most drastic thing in my life was the people that I felt were the closest to me, the people that had known me all my life, my mother and father and relatives and so on, that all rejected me because I wanted to talk about crop circles. And this happens to millions and millions, and has happened to millions and millions of people. This is, for me, where the focus really is on what these campaigns are about. It's us. It's all about us. The second story I want to present to you today is one that was investigated by this great man, Professor John Mack. Now, he's somebody that has been a previous Glastonbury Symposium speaker. I never got the opportunity to meet him myself, but from what I've spoken to with other people and et cetera, and what I've seen of him, he seemed like a brilliant, brilliant man. He said that the implications for our understanding of human identity, who we really are in the universe, and of reality itself are immense from studying this type of phenomena. It wasn't without controversy when he first began to interview witnesses of abductions and so on. The faculty wanted it stopped, and a lot of pressure was applied to stop him. But because of his eminence and because of his tenacity in presenting what he was doing, it was finally approved, and he was kind of given the right to do this research, which has been phenomenal. If you haven't read his book, Passport to the Cosmos, I really urge you to, because it really talks about the transformation in people's lives who have had these experiences. Well, he got involved in another case involving children, which occurred in Zimbabwe in 1994. Now, this again has children in it, but there are some differences to how everybody responded to this incident than how they'd responded to Westall in '66.
In September 1994, over 60 children from this school in the suburbs of Harare, Zimbabwe, witnessed several objects landing and two beings coming out. Just over 2 months later, John and Dominique came to the scene to work with the children, their parents, and the teachers still suffering from shock. John, who essentially specialized in child psychiatry, devoted a great deal of time to interviewing the children.
What strikes me with this case, as you'll see while we go through it, is, as I said, that the government don't come racing round in, heavy-handed tactics now, 30 years later, telling the kids they're all nuts and they've got to shut up. There's nothing. John, a highly eminent psychiatrist, is allowed to go and interview them and research the case. And yeah, there's the usual media stuff, a bunch of kids saw this, that, and the other, but no shut-up campaign. Why not? Something changed in 30 years? I propose that what changed is that the debunking campaign switched from these heavy-handed tactics to the media, to brainwashing people to respond in the same way as they normally respond. And 30 years later, they didn't need to go and be heavy, because we've already got, we'll run a couple of TV shows, we'll tell them it was a weather balloon, and everyone will just switch off and go back to work, right? Because that's where we are now. So it's worked on us all.
Something scared you, is that right?
Yes.
What scared you?
The noise.
What noise?
The noise that we heard in the air.
You heard a noise in the air?
Yes.
What was it like? Like a roar or a buzz or a hum, or what kind of a noise?
It was like someone was blowing a flute. It was scary myself.
It was scary because you saw something yourself?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a little object hovering. It was quite big, actually, and then there was little ones all around it. We saw something silver, and then we quickly ran to the logs, and we saw a silver thing, and we saw a man standing next to it.
What did it feel like when he was looking at you?
I felt scared.
It felt scared? What was scary about it?
Well, I felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before.
Did you see the eyes? What did they look like?
They were going like that.
Where was the pointy part? Was the pointy part in here, or was the pointy part out there? Up there. And what was the feeling when you looked at the eyes?
It was scary.
Mm-hmm. And what scary? Why? What made it scary?
The eyes looked evil.
Evil. Mm-hmm. And what was evil about them? Say what you mean by evil.
It looked evil because it was just staring at me.
With what? Staring at you as if what? As if to do what?
As if it wanted to come and take us.
As if it wanted to come and take you. That was the feeling you got? That it wanted you to go with it? Did you feel like you wanted to go with it? No. Did you feel, what was the effect on you when you felt it wanted to have you go with it?
I just walked away and I started crying.
They came running up here in such a panic. And, I mean, even if we had staged it, they could not have run all together like that. Even if we practiced it, I don't know how many times. But they came up here like a living snake. And they just came, we were in a staff meeting and we just heard them screaming, ah! And then they were here, and a child can't make that up.
I was very sceptical in the beginning as well. I believed that they'd seen something, but I wasn't prepared to accept that it was anything supernatural or anything like that. But I think the consistency of what's been going on indicates that it was more than I was prepared to admit in the beginning.
A mind on the cusp of opening. Something alternative might be there. These kids are genuine. Does anyone believe those kids are lying? You can see it on their faces, can't you? You don't need to be a psychiatrist. They're honest. Okay, let's let's just carry on with this.
What I thought was maybe the war's going to end. Maybe they're telling us the war's going to end.
Why do you think they might want us to be scared?
Because because we don't look after the planet, the area properly.
Mm-hmm. And is this an idea that you have had before, that we don't look after the planet properly in the air, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience.
Mm-hmm. And how did that idea come to you from this experience? This is a little hard, but try to be with me here, okay? How did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
I just felt all horrible inside.
You felt horrible. At what point did you feel that? When you saw the craft, or when you got home at night? Or
when I got home.
You had that horrible feeling when you got home?
Yes.
And say more about that horrible feeling, Lisa. What was it like?
It was like in the world, all the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
Mm-hmm. And those thoughts came to you, had you had those thoughts before this experience?
No.
No. And how did those thoughts come to you? Did they come to you from the craft or from...
From the man.
The man. And did the man say those things to you? How did he get that across to you?
Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes.
What was the sense you got from those eyes?
He was interested.
He was interested. So a telepathic message that we're screwing up the planet. This is not new. And Passport to the Cosmos, John's book, details many, many people from all different walks of life, miles apart, that have had experiences, and the patterns that come out are, there's an ecological message. There's a sense that we're screwing everything up. And often contactees then go on a kind of journey, right? They first of all get ridiculed by all their friends and stuff, and that's normal. And then they go off and they might try and find out and join an ecological group and see if they can do something to play a part in getting us to go green. And this will also then coincide with maybe more, because when you have an experience which everybody outside of you questions, it's quite right that you question yourself. You're going to be full of self-doubt. Am I crazy? Is this mad? Was I deluded? And when you have self-doubt, you can either accept what everybody tells you, or you can persist and try to understand if you're right to doubt yourself, or if there's reasons that you've got that can hold it up. And this then determines the character of the person later on in life. And so what you find with contactees is that they can either, be rubbished and ruined and you never hear from them again, or they can't accept it and they don't want to talk about it anymore, or it can make them into really strong individuals that become interested in philosophy and spirituality, and they go on this path of self-improvement and self-growth and transformation with a bigger picture about themselves and the world. This is something that comes out of this data overwhelmingly to show that these experiences are transformational. Glasses. Yep.
They describe these experiences or these events like a person talks about something that has happened to them. And when you're talking with a psychotic who's telling you something and it's a delusion and you feel that it really didn't happen, I can tell. I mean, I know this is something that person wants me to believe, or they're frightened, or they're distorting reality in some way. There's nothing like that here. These are people of sound mind, by and large, telling me something that's they know that I might think they're crazy, and so they're a little concerned about telling me, and and they're very full of questioning themselves and doubt, and I mean the way, and then they describe something very real and intense, a light or something happened to their body, or it's the whole quality of the way they talk about it is the way a person talks about experience that happened to them.
Had anybody here heard of the 1994 Zimbabwe incident before today? 3, 4. Right. There you go. I rest my case. We've got an eminent psychiatrist from Harvard who investigates a case involving children that's overwhelmingly brilliant, and none of us know about it. The media and everybody else has done their job. They've kept us in the dark. We don't know. We don't know the details. Want to see these kids 20 years later?
All of a sudden, it was just like imaging going through my head of a message, trying to communication. I describe it as like a telepathic communication. There was no talking.
I remember being very captivated by the eyes, and in that moment, however long it was, because I have no idea of the time frame, it was mesmerizing. It was absolutely captivating.
As soon as I saw it, I knew that this was something from another planet or something from out of this worldly space.
People need to know there is something else out there.
Actually makes me want to cry. I felt it then. 20 years, but they've fared well. They know something's happened and they've been transformed by this experience. And I think as we get stronger, as we go along, we're starting more and more and more to come to terms with these things. And this will, I think, inexorably lead us towards perhaps what the meaning is behind all of this thing that's been going on for a very, very long time in different guises. As I said, these people are whistleblowers on the cultural paradigm that we currently live in today. We all know how they will be treated, and people who come forward know also how they're going to be treated, but nevertheless, it's those brave souls that come forward and tell us this stuff that we owe a great deal to. We all kind of learn. Children, funnily enough, I was thinking about this and having a conversation with my son about it last week. We all kind of learn a set of unwritten rules in society about grassing. You know, when you go to school, if you grass on your mates who smash the window and tell the teacher, you're in big trouble. And societies, that prepares you for society that says, if you talk about that stuff, you know, you're going to be in trouble. And this is something that I think that will be the thing that will changes us. Okay. We've got 10 minutes left, you say? 8 minutes. All right. Oops, let me go back. I've lost it. So I want to leave you just with one final quote from Whitley. The discovery of the reality behind the UFO and alien apparitions and the discovery of our own truths will prove to be profoundly intertwined. I believe that when we gain the humility and realize that we've been part of the process that's been blocking this going forward, if we've called somebody crazy or we've been involved in ridiculing something, or the people that have, we're not going to get any step forward by the government suddenly coming and telling us the truth. The Pentagon just released papers and it hasn't changed the world, right? So any disclosure is going to help if they fess up, but I don't believe that's going to make us have a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift must be intertwined with us realizing our own truths, and that means owning up to our own willful blindness within ourselves, each of us individually and all of us collectively. So thank you very much. This has all been about those left behind.
Thank you, Gary.